God, it just makes it so much easier that there's a countdown now, so I don't have to actually verbally count down. What's going on, people? It's another Sunday, another episode of Lost in our trek through 2025 to cover all of seasons 2 and 3. We got a little bit of a catchy title here, episode 5 and Found. This is our first Jin and Sun episode of this season 2. And yeah, what I'll say is that this episode is probably the most reminiscent of season 1. If that makes sense. Like I said, we've kind of moved past the origin phase. We're now into the plot phase. But I feel like now that things inside the hatch have kind of settled down, we kind of take a little bit of a break from that. I would say also this is probably the episode since episode 2 that is focused the most on the other side of the island, on the tail end survivors that Michael, Jin, and Sawyer have found themselves with. And we start to get a little bit more of a sense of those characters and why those characters are, let's say, a little bit more uptight than our group of survivors have gotten, that we've gotten to know. Luke, anything to say before we get started?
No, I think you covered the main part of this. This is another slow down episode before the season ramps up again. Due to, I'm sure there will be some big events that happen, but we are yet to get to those.
Yes, indeed. Like I said, we're back in our slow down phase in this next episode of Talkin Lost. Stay tuned. You know, it's funny. It's I don't often feel bad for the viewers, just in general, because, you know, viewers often make their choices that are completely independent of us and our show. But it always does make me laugh when I think of the people who may have gone and watched Lost, who have never seen it based on our suggestion, and then they went and binged the entire show. And meanwhile, we're only still early on in season 2, and it's like, man, sucks if you're still watching us week to week, and we're like, and you watch the entire show, so you now know like kind of all the mysteries that are coming out, and we're still like recapping it week to week. But
we'll get there. We'll
get there. We'll get there. We're taking it at our own pace. We're taking it on our own time, ultimately. And honestly, I prefer doing it this way because it allows me to, again, pick up on some of the smaller details that I would not have gotten binging it, because I binged it the first time. I mean, I took breaks, obviously, but I binged it the first time. And there was a lot of stuff that I picked up on that was cool, but there were certain things where when I got to the later, basically the way that my original watch trajectory goes, that I watched the first 3 seasons very sporadically throughout all of college, right? So that's 4 years that it took me to finish the first 3 seasons. Then when I get done with college, in like the months leading up to COVID, I start to get back into it. I was finishing up The Wire, which was another show that I'd started in my college years and never finished. And then that's when The Wire got really good, and I binged through the last 3 seasons. And I'm like, man, I feel like I missed a lot of details there. But instead of going back and rewatching The Wire, I instead decided to go back and keep watching Lost. And then, of course, I did the exact same thing with the last 3 seasons of Lost, because the seasons got drastically shorter. So we was able to binge through the rest of them. And again, there's certain details that you become appreciative of with this show and with these with these types of shows, honestly, you know, like the episodes where we do slow down and we do take a break from, I guess, quote unquote, the plot. And what I like about what this season's done so far is how it really has taken its time with getting kind of the 2 sets of characters back together. You know, this would be a storytelling trope that you would see continue throughout the next couple of seasons. You know, the fact that the characters split up and they kind of are doing their own thing, you know? It's been, even though it's only been like 4 days, as they say in this episode, to us, it's been a decent amount of time since, you know, Michael, Jin, and Sawyer set out on their raft journey, and everything that's happened has happened since the end of season 1 and the beginning of this season. You know, they only had a brief interaction with the others, but this episode and Found, it's notable for 2 reasons. One, the fact that I think they do something really interesting with the flashbacks here with following both Jin and Sun. You know, there's not too much happening with our main group of survivors. The plot there is Sun lost her wedding ring, but it creates this really interesting narrative thread where it kind of continues to show the connection between the 2 of them, and how, if anything, you know, their respective absence from each other, their bond has grown, you know, because the last we saw them before they separated, you know, they were kind of going through a little bit of a marital struggle. Jin was still trying to, you know, keep them separated from everybody else and not really interact. And then he suffers this devastating betrayal when he learns that Sun has been learning English this whole time behind his back and was planning on leaving him. And so as a result, that causes him to that causes him to begin helping Michael with the raft and such because he just wants to be away from her. And then, of course, they have this beautiful moment where they kind of rejoin with each other, and Jin reveals that, he's going out to get help so that he can save her. And then, they get attacked by the others, and they're stranded on the other side of the island. None of them know if they're alive or not. I mean, Jin, I'm assuming, knows that Sun is still alive. Sun does not, obviously. But Jin is also, he's become different than the person that we got to know when we first met him, in the first season. He's somebody who's grown this connection with his compatriots, with Sawyer and Michael, And so, obviously, on the other side of the island, when Michael leaves at the beginning of this episode to go and find Walt, Jin is immediately like, we got to go. We got to get him back, because if what they're saying is true, the tail end survivors, and that they've clearly been dealing with the others a lot more than we have. It's established in this episode that whatever happened with the tail end survivors in those, I think they say later on, it's been 48 days, I think, that they've been on the island. Whatever happened with the tail end survivors and their interactions with the others clearly was a lot worse than our main group of survivors, But we're going to get to that in the next couple of episodes. So I know I kind of just dropped a lot there, but what do you think so far of that? Because I guess it's been a while.
You're on a roll. I just had to let you finish. Don't get in the way of an oncoming snowball. Just let it get bigger and bigger until it stops. But yeah, it was a really good episode. Like you said, that connection with Jin and Michael, I think that's a testament to the kind of situation that they're in, and these extreme situations can cause people to become friends even though they don't speak the same language, and it just having to do that, like, just that communication and still make it plausible. And he's starting to learn a few words, so
that's the thing too, is that even though we still got the language barrier, that at the very least, like you see with his conversation with Sawyer, with Michael, with Mr. Echo later on in the episode, another awesome addition to the show, who I'll get into in a bit. You're starting to see, like, like he's been with them enough now to understand them, even if he doesn't know exactly what they're saying.
Yeah, and like you said just before, when you talk about how you consume, I just really like having this consistency in my life when so many things are sporadic. Just every weekend, it's Lost. You get another episode of Lost. What's happening on the island? This week, it's a Jin and Sun episode, and when I thought, okay, we kind of had the first season of flashbacks, what more is there? And we get this one, which is how they met in the first place, and who Jin was before he started working for Sun's father. He was just a what are they called, doorman?
Yeah, doorman.
Yeah, just a good guy who lets a father and a kid in because he has to pee, and he gets fired for that. And just the kind of character that Jin is, and why he would go to help Michael find Walt, even though he's just one man against, like, how many others we saw them walk by. I'm assuming that's
we'll get to that in a bit. Yeah, that was some great visual imagery as far as Lost goes. But yeah, touching on the Jin and Sun flashback, you're 100% right in the sense of where it's kind of set up as this is their origin story as far as how they met. What was so interesting about their respective flashbacks in season 1 is, even though it was mirror versions of kind of the same set of events from each of their different perspectives, this is the kind of their origin story, how they met ultimately. And it adds, even, I think, again, going into the season 2 flashbacks, how season 2, the flashbacks, the role that they're playing is that they're adding more context to the stuff that we kind of already knew about the characters. That's what's interesting about kind of the way the flashbacks are utilized, because you're going to see how they're changed in each season ultimately. Season 1 is we're just getting to know these characters. We're just kind of, getting some extra context on who these people were before they came to the island. This season, we know who they are. We have a pretty good sense of them. And with the exception of the new characters that we get, this set of characters, we're just getting more context, more added to stuff, to the events that we already knew, for running it down. Jack, we saw he was married in the first season. Now this season, we got to know how he got married. Michael, we know that he was separated from the mother, from Walt's mother. Now we see how that process happened. Locke, we see his father in the last season stole his kidney, and now in this season we see him trying to move on. He is just not able to. Then last week with Hurley, and how we know that Hurley won the lottery, which is what brought him to Australia, but all these bad things started happening to him. And that episode, last week's episode, was more so kind of him trying to reckon with that fact and try and keep things as normal as possible before ultimately, this massive inevitable change happened. And now this season, and now this episode rather, we get Sun and Jin, where we saw how they were married and kind of how tumultuous that marriage was at the end of the day. And now we start to get a reason why. We got the sense of, again, there was this massive class difference between Sun, who was raised very, very wealthy, versus Jin, who came from a poor fishing village. And now, again, in addition to kind of what's so interesting about the class struggle that has become all too common that maybe people may not have been aware of at the time. What's so interesting is we get that from an otherworldly perspective. We get that from the Korean perspective and how much more harsh and more strict that dividing line between classes is ultimately, where Jin, again, comes from this poor fishing village, is able to impress the manager of the hotel that he's working at, but he's now expected to kind of, even though he's crossed the dividing line, he's still expected to reinforce that line ultimately and show that, like, people that come from your side of the world are not allowed to cross over this threshold. And when it comes to, it's like, oh, wow, that comes before this honor, this basic human decency of, this dad who comes from the same fishing village just needs a place for a son to pee. And now it's the fact of, I forget what the guy says to him, but it's like, something along the lines of, it's like, people like you, and he's just like, yeah,
don't let people like you
exactly.
in here.
And he's basically just like, yeah, fuck that, I'm not dealing with that. And earlier on, he got this kind of like omen from his roommate, basically, that he would meet the love of his life and that it would be signified by orange. And of course, and that's tying into a little bit more, not quite the supernatural, but a little bit more the philosophical, if you will. This whole idea of, oh, this stuff all seems hokum. There's no like predictability or realness or no logic to back this sort of stuff up. Really, this sort of I guess interpretation of signs, if you will, but there is something to it, again, tying back to the whole man of science, man of faith thing, this whole dividing line of, it's not quite one, it's definitely not quite the other, but again, the balance line is somewhere down the middle. And Lindelof has talked about this in many, many different forms. We're going to get into it specifically once we get to the last season as well. And it's interesting that we're talking about Severance right after this, because that also ties into this as well, which is that this idea of omens, and if there is some realness to it, the idea of this kind of dimension as we perceive it is not necessarily all that there is to reality and existence, where he says it's like, oh, this I'm gonna meet the love of my life and it's gonna have something to do with the color orange. He's seemingly left this amazing job that it turns out had a lot more to it than he realized. He sees this gorgeous woman walking by in an orange dress. He like doesn't think anything of it, turns around, bumps into Sun, and you just immediately see the connection that's established there. You don't, obviously there's more that happens in between there, and then you also have Sun as well, who is going kind of through her own version of that as well, where she's being set up with this arranged marriage kind of, and she kind of unintentionally ends up bonding with the guy because they're both like kind of bonding over the fact that they've both been kind of put into the situation that they weren't expected to be in.
We've seen this like in many things.
In many different things, but it's interesting how it kind of gets flipped on its head here, where she ends up unintentionally bonding with the guy, and then the guy basically turns around and is like, yeah, I'm basically going to go to America and marry this woman that I met from university. I hope you're cool with that. And she's like, yeah, sure. And it's kind of
that's what I was thinking.
That interaction is just great. I thought that was just so funny. I remember laughing hysterically at that the first time I saw that. And it's like, oh man, just how things get interpreted completely the wrong way, But it's like it's really good, I think, connective tissue. Sun and Jin have always been kind of it's almost again like by virtue of the fact that, okay, like this is the first time that we're really trying to take a more humanistic edge to what is perceived as, almost alien cultures, at least at that time. The fact that, it had been so long, obviously, but we still felt like there was this alienation between kind of generally Eastern culture. And this is really one of the first instances where we get to see so much pathos, so much humanity given to that sect of the world. And it's fascinating and it's really good. And there's a reason why Sun and Jin are such fan favorite characters and why their storylines always tend to be, more interesting. I mean, all of these characters' origins are respectively interesting, but on the island itself, and kind of the other half of the reason why this episode is so interesting is we've obviously heard talk about the others a lot, and kind of the reason why they're, kind of their menace is felt in these early seasons is because, again, it's going based off of a lot of what you can't see, but you can hear and feel them, and the fact that, you only see them one time in the episode, but kind of the way that the tail end survivors, the fear is present on their faces, where again,
it's the don't show the shark, like stretch it as long as you can.
Yes.
Create the fear of them. Like we saw them on the boat. I think that was itself like pretty scary, but this is like a whole nother thing. They're walking around barefoot in the jungle, covered in mud, like Jin and Mr. Echo, who my mom says will be an important character going forward.
He will.
and he's great. I really love him. And yeah, just that scene of them hiding like just like a few centimeters away, like
Yeah.
it's just great.
But also not even just when you see their feet pass by, just the fact that like Mr. Echo senses them. Like, I mean, like he gets this sixth sense of them, like as they're tracking Michael, and he literally tells him to get down, like almost like what's assumed to be a couple minutes before they show up. And again, it's just that the look on their man, Echo and that actor, Adewale Akinyi Agbaye, man, that guy, every time he shows up in something, he is always like the best part of anything that he was the scene stealer in Oz for the first 4 seasons that he was on the show before his character was, tragically exited. And I've heard tell that he is a little bit of a difficult actor to work with, which is tough, but man, it really shows in the roles that he has. Like every time he shows up in a movie, in a show, he had a micro part in season 5 of Game of Thrones as the leader of the slaver who brings Tyrion and Jorah to Meereen to sell them. He's just the massive frame, those intense eyes, the very deep voice, usually with the different accent. I believe he's British, but again, he's no stranger to doing accent work.
He was Killer Croc and Suicide
Yes,
Squad,
he was.
right?
Yes, yeah. He was. That was unfortunately him. A little bit of a thankless role there. But my point stands.
Not his fault, that role.
Definitely not his fault. But
he made the most of it. Yes,
he really did.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but my point stands that he is always a Caesar. I really, again, it's the fact that there's so much less of the tail end survivors. But again, I feel like we've already gotten to get a pretty good sense of them, even though we've only spent a certain amount of time. Very good introduction for a whole new set of characters. Like I said, Michelle Rodriguez as Ana Lucia, Cynthia Watros as Libby, Bernard, who revealed to be Rose's surviving husband, who we thought was dead all this time. So we've kind of got that connection there. We've got the other one as well, but she's really not that important ultimately at the end of the day. Yeah, it's interesting how they've managed to like kind of include this a completely other faction of characters who were on the same plane as them, but like because they've had to experience vastly different circumstances, they really do have this much kind of different sense of, living and surviving on the island. Whereas our characters are kind of just like incorporated into their everyday life. They are very much still on the, keeping it down low, being wary of the fact that they are not the only ones on this island, being a lot more careful, a lot more cautious, a lot more strict with the rule set, And Ana Lucia as well, we also get to know a little bit more of her. Again, she is very tough, no nonsense, calls the shots, does not really have any sort of tolerance for for backtalk or anything. You already see this contemptuous relationship that's been formed with her and Sawyer. Sawyer also not looking too good from that gunshot on his shoulder. It is only getting worse.
No, I read the episode description of the next one. It's not looking good for
not looking good really, for not just for Sawyer, but for a couple of different characters that we're gonna see. But yeah, so already you have this dichotomy that's been established as the difference between our main set of survivors and the tail end survivors. We got our first instance of the others walking by, and again, a really, really frightening image, like just purely awe-inspiring. Like it reminds me of, ironically enough, also there's a reason why I feel like I don't remember who was ripping off from who, but again, back when the White Walkers were only known as the others in those early seasons of Game of Thrones, again, kind of how they would raise the level of fear surrounding those, by often showing them at a distance, not having them at close-ups, hearing them before you saw them, really establishing and building up the level of fear before you actually see them. Like you were saying, the comparison to the shark in Jaws. So you have that. You have Jin manages to save Michael, and they manage to convince them, being like, look, we're going to help you find Walt, but we've got to get back to our main group of characters first before we do that. And, you can't just go out there guns blazing, like I said, it's because whatever these others are, they have been shown that they're clearly the ones that have your kid, and they are clearly not to be messed with. So we got to be careful here. And then back on the main beach, like I said, the main beach, that's kind of like the secondary plot of the island. But, you have Sun looking for a wedding ring. You have her getting different advice from people, Jack. We're getting more and more like kind of build up as far as like what happened between Jack and his wife and ultimately why they separated. But you have Jack trying to give her advice, which is basically where, it always ends up kind of turning up where you least expect it. You have Hurley trying to do his best by saying that, Vincent may have eaten it, and they end up like trading some interesting backstory there. You have, she has a little bit of a breakdown, so it's ripping up the garden, and you have Locke come in. And once
Locke
again,
always shows up.
always
Like the
shows
writers
up.
are like, hey, we need someone to give some good advice.
Shows up, knows
Locke
exactly
spawns
what
in.
to say, always has like some bombs of wisdom to just drop right there. And like again, just with this great, and Son's like, I don't think I've ever seen you angry. And Locke's like, oh, I used to get angry, believe me. And of course, he you know, another great use of dropping the title in the episode where he's like, I stopped being lost, and everyone's almost, you can almost hear the background, everyone being like, oh, he said the title in the show of the thing. And but yeah, just some more great nuggets of wisdom. And then finally, of course, it's Kate that ends up helping her find it when what's it called? I still don't know what to make of this final scene. Really, again, any scene of Kate, we haven't been seeing much of her this season, but the sequences that we have seen, like after she helped, so far, Kate's role in this season consists of accidentally getting the computer that is hooked up to the button that if it isn't pressed every 108 minutes, the island might blow up. She almost like gets that destroyed. She takes a bottle of shampoo and directly undercuts Hurley when he's supposed to be keeping track of all the itinerary of the stuff in the hatch. And then as soon as Sun shows her where the bottle is of all the messages that her and Claire and Shannon found last episode that Sun buried for the purposes of, you know, not freaking out everybody, Kate immediately just opens the bottle and starts going through all of everybody's secret messages. And her excuse is, oh, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And then they just happen to find the ring there as far as where Sun buried it. And I'm like, wait, are we supposed to be thanking Kate for that? Like, something feels off there a bit.
I don't know what they're really doing with Kate right now. I think they need Sawyer back to do something more compelling with Kate.
I agree.
So,
I
just
agree.
waiting for that.
Yeah, we're just kind of waiting for Sawyer and Kate to be reunited. Don't worry, it'll happen in the next couple of episodes for sure. Like I said, where we don't have that much longer. Like I said, the Helen survivors have set out. They're starting to make their journey back towards the main beach, and
because they're going on that. We don't know how big the island is really,
right.
So we don't know how long that's going to take.
Right, exactly. But yeah, shit, just lost my train of thought there. No, yeah, that's exactly it. But yeah, they may be reunited sooner rather than later. But like I said, it's time for all the people who are on the plane to be reunited as they continue to kind of explore. Like I said, we're still very early on in this season. We're only going to be 6 episodes in by the time we wrap up the set of March episodes next week. So, like I said, that's really it as far as everything this episode goes. Like I said, we got so you just recently caught up and finished with
I caught up an hour ago.
Wow. Oh, so you really
I said I would get there, and
you did. You did, and you were under the gun. Oh man, I'm excited to talk about it. So that was, like I said, we're not gonna do social media plugs at the end of this episode because anybody who's watching us either on YouTube or is listening to us on Spotify, we're covering Severance next. And oh man, we've got a lot of stuff to cover there. So
I think this is maybe the first time where I'm the least positive on a thing that everyone is overwhelmingly
really
positive
on.
Yeah.
Oh man, save that. We're gonna get back to that. I'm very, very happy though that I love it when somebody throws out an alternate take to everyone's popularity. So stay tuned.
I never have an alternate take to.
I know you're usually again. So I'm like, you're not known to be contrarian. So this is gonna make this even more interesting. So stay tuned for our thoughts on Severance season 2 coming up next.